Hi, I'm Skip Nipper. Welcome to my podcast where I tell you about Nashville's great baseball history and traditions.
Shot to right, a one-hop liner.
Certainly about its past, especially about Tom Wilson Park, Herschel Greer Stadium, Sulphur Dell, but also a little bit about its present and future too.
Yes, he can. It makes the waist-high catch.
And I introduce you to players, coaches, and other fans and their love for everything baseball.
The high fly ball down the right field corner, going way back, hits a lead-off home run.
Well, life comes at you in different ways. I was not planning on doing this subject on a podcast episode, not at this time. I was prepared to do a podcast on music and Nashville and Sulphur Dell and concerts and things like that when the ballpark was alive, but the days past have let us know that a very good friend, not just to me, but to so many, has passed away. You know, I've had people come into my life. I've told my wife, I have met so many wonderful people through baseball just by uttering the word, rubbing elbows with people who love baseball too, being a part of organizations like Sabre and Nashville Old Timers Baseball, and Southern Association Conference, and visiting ballparks and Rickwood Field and all those things. And through those things, I have met people who have gone on before that I still count as a real blessing to me. Junie McBride, who was Nashville's Mr. Baseball for so many years, told stories about warming up Honus Wagner back in the 20s when he was a kid and how big Honus Wagner's hands were. Wagner was at Sulphur Dell to play an exhibition game for the Pittsburgh Ball Club. And he said how big his hands were. And I didn't think about asking him to sign a ball. That wasn't something you thought about back in those days. But Junie had great stories. He told great jokes, baseball stories. He was just one of a kind. And then there was Clinton Butch McCord, who played Negro Leagues ball. And he also played in what we know as organized ball and won 2 silver gloves as the best first baseman in all of minor league baseball. And he told great stories about his time with the Negro Leagues and growing up in Nashville and playing baseball and football. Played football at Tennessee State, Tennessee A&I think it was called back in those days. But he had great stories. And when you went to his home to visit him, he didn't want you to leave. He wanted to keep telling you stories. And he passed away. Junie passed away in 2009, I think, and Butch in 2011. And I count them both as great friends. They pulled me in with their stories. Then, of course, Dad passed away in 2016. He was a great dad to my brother Jim and I and our wives. And I'll tell you, he had great stories. And I remember one time sitting at a luncheon or a dinner or something, and Junie and Dad were talking about a certain game. And Dad was corrected by Junie and said, "No, Virgil, I don't think the count was full. I think it was 2 strikes and 1 ball," or something like that. They just had these great memories and could tell wonderful stories. Still miss Dad every day. And his good friend, Joe Casey, who died a little over a year ago, who died on his birthday on July the 31st. And he still had this great memory of baseball, of growing up in North Nashville across the street from Dad and his family when he was a youngster, and how they would play marbles together and how much they enjoyed playing football and basketball and baseball together at North High School. And those stories, once again, reeled me in. And then there was Farrell Owens, after Junie died, who became Nashville's eyes and ears of Nashville Old Timers Baseball. Farrell Owens was one of those guys who would call you up and say, "Let's go to the ballpark tonight." And I couldn't resist that in most cases. And we would get into lively discussions, not arguments. Sometimes we would state our cases about a certain player or a certain situation. And you couldn't really argue with Farrell. He knew everything about baseball. He studied the game, he managed the game, and he loved to play it. And most recently, Bobby Dernball. Bobby played for the Nashville Vols back in the 50s. And he had a great memory. He was 90 years old when he passed. But just a few weeks before, he and I chatted over the phone, and he was talking about this player or that player. And those kind of guys like Junie and Butch, Virgil, Dad, Joe Casey, Farrell Owens, Bobby Dernball, man, they're in my circle of great baseball friends. Well, word has come that Rick Brewer has passed away. Now, I want to tell you a little about Rick. Once again, he was a friend to so many. You could not help but rub elbows with him, be in his presence, and call him a friend. And I think that's how he was to those who came within his existence. His death is a great loss. His love for baseball, especially the vintage game, and that's what makes him a little different from Junie and Butch and Dad and Joe Casey and Farrell and Bob Dernball, because Rick fell in love with the game the way it was played in the 1860s. It was evident in the way he played and how he encouraged others. And if you were around him, as I mentioned earlier, he was always an inspiration, not only to his teammates, but to his opponents alike. And there was a great respect for Rick Brewer. I want to read to you some things that I have pulled from mostly Facebook today, that what some of his teammates and some of the other vintage baseball players have said about him. One is Trapper Haskins. Now, Trapper was one of the two people that began the Tennessee Vintage Baseball Association many years ago. And Trapper, now everybody in vintage baseball had a nickname, a team name, or a name that drew on some experience or some trait that they may have had, because that's how newspapers wrote about it back in the old days in vintage baseball. And Trap says, when I met Rick, Uncle Jesse Brewer, he went by Uncle Jesse, he was working at the Williamson Farmers Co-op where we bought our field chalk. And one week, Rick asked a teammate what sport we were buying the chalk for. And as soon as he learned about vintage baseball, he was all in. And Trapper wrote, all in capital letters, all in. Rocky Jackson, who is known as Buttermilk, wrote, so many feelings when I got the message this morning. So many road trips with you in the passenger seat. And he's talking about Uncle Jesse. So many lessons learned. Thanks for being a mentor. Thanks for the advice from everything from vintage baseball to being a better father. Thanks for listening. Thanks for understanding. Can you hear the words, what people think and thought about Uncle Jesse? And Rocky goes on to say, if you went 0 for 5 or 5 for 5, you'd get in the truck and say, that was fun, wasn't it? Can you believe we're lucky enough to get to play? And when someone would say, looks like you're having fun out there, Rick would always say, it's the most fun a boy could have with his pants on. Rocky, thank you for that. Those were great words. And then there's Dylan Platts. He goes by TikTok. And I can remember Rick urging him on, sitting on the bench while TikTok was up as a striker in the game, and would say, come on, Tick, or come on, Talk. I don't remember, but he always would call them by their names. And Dylan writes, if you've ever met Rick, you know Rick. Though you may know him as Jesse or Uncle Jesse, he's strong, resilient, kind. Folks all over know him for something, whether it be his beard, his love for baseball, his history and success with cattle, or any number of things he's gotten himself into. You may have even run into him at the co-op in Williamson County. There are few men on this planet like Rick, and certainly none with hands as big as his, or a heart as big as his. He's the kind of person who could talk to you for days, but he's also the kind of person who would never ask for help, even when faced with the most challenging of circumstances. This is a trait, of course, carried by his children. And Rodney Massengale, who's known as the Kid, wrote, he was so much more than just a teammate, a true character in all aspects of life. He was bigger than life. He never met a stranger and truly cared about each and every person he encountered. He was one to always ask how the family was doing, how work was going, or just how life was treating you. He had endless stories, perfect anecdotes, or just his opinion that he would tell you about in a way only he could. The world lost a legend. We all lost a friend. And I can only imagine the baseball game going on in heaven, penciled in at pitcher, Uncle Jesse. Now, one of many I've met with a connection to our great game. There will never be an Uncle Jesse as long as I live. This is me writing and talking now. And I'm sure the Mick and the Babe and Jolt and Joe have already given him his pinstripe robe and matching wings. You see, he loved the Yankees. And they're talking about baseball in heaven right now. Now, upon learning of the passing of Babe Ruth on August the 16th, 1948, Grantland Rice wrote, "The greatest figure the world of sport has ever known has passed from the field. Game called on account of darkness. Babe Ruth is dead." Now, at the time, he was considered the Dean of American Sports Writers, and Rice revised a poem that he had penned in 1910, and in tribute to Uncle Jesse, and with apologies to Grantland Rice, I'd like to read these words with a little bit of a revision to them. And it goes, "Game called by darkness, let the curtain fall. No more remembered thunder sweeps the field. No more the ancient echoes hear the call to one who wore so well both sword and shield. Uncle Jesse's left us with the night to face, and there is no one who can take his place. Game called, and silence settles on the plain. Where's the crash of ash against the sphere? Where's the mighty music, the refrain that once brought joy to every waiting ear? Uncle Jesse's left us lonely in the dark, forever waiting for the flaming spark. Game called, what more is there for us to say? How dull and drab the field looks to the eye, for one who ruled it in a golden day has waved his cap to bid us all goodbye. Uncle Jesse's gone, by land or sea or foam, may the great umpire call him safe at home. Well, Uncle Jesse loved Mickey Mantle, loved number 7, but to me and to so many others, he'll always be number 1. In vintage baseball, numbers on jerseys and shirts had not been invented yet. But I want to tell you a couple of other things about Uncle Jesse when he played the game, because I really haven't talked a lot about that. He played with kindness. He played the game the way it was supposed to be played. And I love the way that all these vintage baseball players play with heart, with soul, and with intent to win, not to hurt anybody, because it's a gentleman and ladies game. Yes, there are ladies who play, and they're just the same. They play to win, and they play to make outs, and they play to score runs. And that was Jesse. And I can't believe that somehow in the years that he played the vintage game, baseball, 2 words, base and ball, that everyone who came in contact with him saw him play that way. Heck, if he was pitching and he couldn't get it over the dish, over the plate, he was a right-hander. He would throw with the left hand because he could throw with either hand. And that's the way he played too, all the way with every part of himself. And now he's gone where he can play however he wants to, vintage or not. But we all love Uncle Jesse. And I'll tell you to close, you struck well, Jesse. You struck well. And hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray. I love you, man. Huzzah. And you will be missed.